Okay.
Watch sandbars grow.
Good afternoon and welcome to the June 29th Special Committee Police and Community Meeting. My name is Councilwoman Sylvia Ortiz. I represent District 3 and I also chair. If my colleagues will introduce themselves, I'd appreciate it.
Mike Padilla, representing District 5.
Karen Hiller, District 1.
Recording in progress.
Okay. First thing we want to do is call the meeting to order. Next, we want to approve the minutes from May the 28th.
I make a motion to approve.
It's been moved to approve the minutes from May the 28th.
Second.
Second by Karen. Hi, Karen.
Aye.
All those in favor, raise your right hand. Unanimously. Okay. Next, we have a presentation from the District Attorney's Office. We're so glad that you guys have joined us today on just some questions that we've come across with people that they have concerns or questions. So we're so glad that you've taken your time out to join us. So thank you very, very much. And with that said, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Councilwoman
To our
Ortiz.
DA.
Mike Kagay, Shawnee County District Attorney. I'm very happy to be here. Thank you all for having us. With me today is Special Investigator Pat McLaughlin, who's a longtime detective over at TPD, had a broad range of experience, including homicide and cold case type investigations, which is why I brought him on into the office. He's been with us since January of 2020. So we were talking just before we went live, and that was about 2 months before all the COVID, chaos began. So it was a fun time for him to begin. But he's been effective in his work. He's embedded over at TPD, thanks to Chief Wheelis and the support that he gives us in this partnership. And we feel like it's been a very effective program. I'm going to let him talk about specifics on investigations. As far as procedures go, we're not going to get into specific ongoing investigations for obvious reasons. And the same would be said for cases that we've actually filed based on that partnership that's in place. But again, I just want to thank you all for the opportunity to be here. I'm happy to answer any questions when he's done. And with that, I'll hand it off to Pat.
Before you continue, can we hear Taylor? Are we doing good on hearing? I know he was a little soft there, and I just want to make sure that...
Yeah, we're pulling the audio directly from the mics into...
So we're good. Okay, thank you.
So I have been with the District Attorney's Office since January 2020, and I'm working very closely with the Homicide Unit at the Topeka Police Department. And I put together just a short little presentation on cold case investigations and some of the information that you would probably find relevant or to this topic. Obviously, please stop me if we get to a slide and you have a question, and I'd be happy to try to answer that for you.
I think what I'm going to do, if you don't mind, let you go through the whole slide, and then we'll come back for questions.
Sure, no problem.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's not turning. There we go. So I guess the first part would be most people kind of know what cold cases are, but basically it's just something that's unsolved and remains open, and we're either working on or waiting for additional evidence to further the investigation to whether or not we can bring charges against someone. Really the most important part of this, I think that would be to note, would be that they're not really time specific. Having worked a lot of major cases over my career and being involved with the current homicide unit, there will be, obviously, the headlines are case from 1985 solved, case from 1975 solved, but those, as you know, are normally in the national news. And there's a reason why they are national news story, because they are very difficult and pretty rare to get a case of that old being solved. That being said, there are some cases that detectives will be working on, and a month into it, 2 months into it, you can tell, you're like, we are running out of things to work on here because we're just not sure. So the main thing I'd just like to make it known is that they're not time specific. We have a significant case from last year that's unsolved. There's a homicide from February this year that I would call cold at this point. And so I try to work on, any time frame, but it's not just the cases from the 80s. If that makes sense. So the first thing is, how do we clear cases? So the main one would be obviously arresting the suspect who committed one of these homicides. The second would be the death of the offender, and this would be what you would see in a murder-suicide, a lot of times in domestics, but not always, where someone kills someone and then, for their own personal reasons, then take their own life. And then lastly would be justified. This would be characterized as if someone was maybe breaking into a home and was armed with a weapon and the homeowner shot and killed them. That is still a homicide, but it's justified and there will be no further charges. So that's how we clear the homicides, by and large. So the national homicide clearance rate is 61%, just through FBI Unified Crime Report. And this has stayed, I think, pretty much in the 60%-ish range for a very long time. To compare that to Topeka homicide totals, I went back over the last 10 years. We've had 179 homicides, 145 of them have been cleared, and that's an 81% clearance rate. I really can't stress, I mean, I know I worked there and everything, but that's a very high clearance rate for homicides. Kansas City, just down the road, last year they were running at 50% homicide. So 81%, I would challenge that to any department in the country, quite honestly, of any size that has to deal, have more than about 5 or 6 homicides a year. So that speaks a lot to the guys that are working in the unit, clearing all those cases. So cold cases, for the last 20 years, there's about 43. Prior to that, from 80 to about 2000, there's about 30. I say approximation. The older that you get into some of these unsolved homicides, the more difficult it becomes. A lot of times there's just information has been lost to time, quite honestly. I know at one point there was like a pipe break a long time ago, and it damaged and destroyed some case files. And so when I say approximation, there'll be some cases I'll go back from a long time ago and really just can't find them. And it's not really through negligence or anything like that. It's just where things happen. And if you try to go find a case from 1972, it would be very difficult to find. Some of that, I think, was lost in the move when we moved back in like 95 from the old property room to the current property room. And so there's things that just got misplaced along the way on those older cases. The ones from 2000 on, those are pretty well squared away as far as what I would be looking for. One thing that is sometimes not thought about, but it's missing persons. So from 2019 prior, we have still 22 active missing persons. It didn't include current because you have a lot of runaways, you have other missing persons that they're okay, but we just haven't actually cleared them. They haven't been found yet. So prior to 2019, we have suspected probably 4 of those, 2 of those almost certainly, but 4 of those are probably homicides. We just have not found the missing person. Just yesterday in the news or day before, there was a skull found in the Kansas River. I have no idea if that's going to be related to anything that we're working, but sometimes that's how we'll get back on the case because we found the body. So we'll have to wait and see on that one. So how cold cases are solved, this is really how all cases are solved. We start with witnesses, and when I include witnesses in 2021, I would probably throw in video surveillance, kind of as an independent type witness, confessions from the actual suspects, and physical evidence to include DNA, fingerprints, trace evidence, things such as that. So if we don't have at least one of those, cases are pretty hard to solve. So I went back and just kind of listed some of the notable or what I consider notable homicides, unsolved homicides here in the Topeka area. The first one in 1978, Shirley Steiner was abducted from her workplace from Hills over there off of First Street, and her body was later found along I-70. The investigators back then believed that she was probably the victim of a serial killer. I actually concur with that, just from what I've read, and that person was later executed in Missouri on other homicides. So it's one of those, it's unsolved, but it's probably who was involved in that case. 1981 is Jackie Hay. I would say that's probably the most famous or infamous case, and this was the first case that Mr. Kagay asked me to look at when I first came, and I was very aware of this case, having looked at it myself when I was a detective at one point. And this case is hands down the largest case file in the Topeka Police Department's records division. I think it's 8,000 or 9,000 documents. And this has been looked at multiple times by different detectives over the years, and they have gone well above and beyond what you would kind of consider in a cold case. So I did look at this case. We did do some follow-up, some DNA follow-up, attempted some interviews, and there are, persons we have looked at, but at this point, that case is where it's been for the last 40 years. 1993, Troy Kepke, this was the night manager of the Sirloin Stockade, who was making a night deposit at the Fidelity Bank at 21st and Wanamaker, and he was shot during the course of a robbery. On a side note here, a homicide detective and I drove down to the Houston, Texas area last week, following up on a tip that we had received about someone involved in that case. So that would be an example of one of the older ones we are still actively looking at, following up, and so forth. 1994 was Roxanne's Whistler. This was a case out on Villa West Drive. It has been in the news a lot over the years. 2013 was the quadruple homicide at 1629 Central Park. I actually was, myself and another detectives, we were the callback detectives on this case, so I'm very familiar with this case. And this case has been worked a lot over the years on trying to determine who exactly did it and what motivations there might have been. And then, as I said earlier in the presentation, there's one from last year, the Crystal Andrews and Mercedes Holford case. This case is still actively being worked, but obviously we're getting to be close to a year out, and at this point, no charges have been filed on that one. So this is just kind of general information. Some of the oldest that have ever been solved in Topeka, or in Kansas, BTK killer. This took him 31 years to be solved. And honestly, that really didn't take off until he started notifying the media to get some attention. So, but it was solved. And then, oops, there's a recent one. And this occurred in Johnson County just a couple of months ago. I don't know much about this other than it was a stabbing in an apartment complex, but it took 36 years to be solved. So here are some arrests over the years of cold cases. In 1979, Jack Hanrahan was abducted from around 19th and Gage. His body was later found in Osage County. Thomas Berberich was charged in that case. He was acquitted. It was actually tried in Osage County because that's where his body was found, but it was a Topeka. He was taken from here. 2011, Dana Chandler was charged in the 2002 murders of Karen Harkness and Michael Sisko, and this case is still pending through the court system. 2014, Monroe Lockhart was charged in the 2000 murder of Damon Anderson, and he pled guilty. He also pled guilty on another homicide in 2012 that they were actively working at the time. Corey Brown, I think is who it was. So he's in for both those cases. Last year, Mike Kagay filed charges on Yanez Sanford for the 2016 homicide of Dominic Ray, Camera Trotter, and her unborn baby. This case is still working its way through the court. In October, he charged Javon Smith with the 2017 murder of Kiana Hodge. That case is also still going through the court. And just a few months ago, Claude Kearse was charged with the 2019 murder of Darius Calvert. The interesting note on this one was this was a missing persons case. And so that's why those cases do get attention. And obviously, all these cases with COVID, everything is really backed up as far as hearings and everything like that. So my responsibilities is this is a civilian part-time position. I mainly do analysis and support the homicide unit. I have the ability to go through and look at cases. I have the flexibility of having more time. They're the homicide unit, which some people don't realize is that they work homicides, but they also work shootings and stabbings where people survive. So they have a full plate in addition to working just homicides. And they do the heavy lifting as well as the crime scene unit and the other officers that investigate these cases. And my job is really a support role. And so I have the time to look through cell phone downloads and social media and listen to recorded phone calls, things like that they don't always have that kind of time. And so that will include more recent unsolved homicides like last year and early this year and ones back in the 80s and 90s. So that's basically what I do on a day-to-day basis. And I will go with them sometimes, and a lot of times we'll brainstorm, and I try to think of just maybe something that other people hadn't thought about. It's like, hey, let's try this, let's try that, let's send this in for testing. And they've been very good about listening to my recommendations and agreeing or not agreeing, or we'll discuss and figure out what the best solution to getting that done is. And I think that's it. So.
That's awesome. Does anybody have, I have some questions, but I'll hold mine. If council members, do you have any questions?
I have some, but I'd let the chair go first.
Okay, Karen, do you have any?
Only a comment is what comes to mind. I've always felt like our department was really great at catching bad guys and doing research, and it's nice to hear this report. That's it.
Okay. I was pregnant and walked to try to find Jackie Hay, so that always is stuck in my heart. And whenever I hear her name, they were questioning whether I even should go, but I was pregnant with my first child, and I thought, man, that was just crazy. So her mom, I pray for her all the time, and it's always in my heart. So you said that you have no time frame. Do you bring them back on rotation? How do you do that? Do we look at, we haven't touched this case for a year, or?
I would say it's sort of both. We will get tips, and I wouldn't say on a certain time frame, just kind of random tips that come in over different cases, and those will automatically take a priority. The trip to Houston, Texas was one of them. Last year we got this tip about someone who may or may not be involved, and we were going to go, but then COVID got in the way, so we were able to finally go. But that case obviously will come, whatever case it is, will be the priority at that moment. But the one benefit from having worked in detectives for a long time is I already knew maybe not necessarily read them all, but I already knew the majority of the cases, what they were about and what difficulties or what was kind of going on in the investigation. So that is very helpful than had someone from somewhere else never had any knowledge of it, because I know it's like, yeah, they've looked at this, I know what the problems are, and so I try to focus on cases that have more solvability. I mean, I think you want to start there, and then we'll work to the cases that are more difficult. So we do the tips first, and then I will go through and look at the other cases and the older cases after that.
I guess let me state that a different way. I was glad to see our interim chief come aboard because he had some detective behind him.
Just a little bit.
Little experience there. I don't know if it was good or bad, but anyway.
It was pretty good. Opinions vary.
Because what I hear from my constituents is that the family does not get notified, and then we change detectives so they don't know who to contact. And so I guess that's very, very important to the family, that whether it's by letter, whether it's 4 months, 6 months, just that they get some type of notification that that case is still open, because I think that's important to them. And so that's why I asked that question. I don't know if you guys do that.
So that is obviously a very important part of this, but it's also kind of a double-edged sword. We sometimes do contact the family about the cases, but sometimes some families don't want to know unless you've got a big lead. So I typically am not going to call a family. If I just open it up and looking through a case, I'm not going to call them and say, I'm looking through your case, because it tends to give them false hope, because percentage-wise, it's a low percentage that get solved. These cold cases get solved, quite honestly. And so you tend to give them some false hope if you do that. However, sometimes it's important because they might have information, or if they call, I mean, when they call in, obviously, we immediately call them back and talk to them. But, there's 75, 100 cases, and I've looked through a lot of them. And that would be, I understand the issue that you're talking about, but there are some families that have, I've seen it in the reports where they're like, yeah, don't call us unless basically someone's getting arrested.
And I can appreciate that. I have a young gentleman who came to me, this is just one instance, and said, my dad's been dead 10 years, nobody cares. They don't care because he's a minority. They don't care because how he dies. So that's what sparked up the
Right. Well,
the
no,
conversation.
and I completely get that. I guess the main thing that I would like to express is that the Topeka Police Department and the Shawnee County District Attorney's Office have not forgotten about this.
Okay.
This is I know they've had detectives in the past that have been kind of tasked with doing that, but this is a sole position dedicated just to that. So, no, it's happening. The difficulty is these cases are cold for a reason. They really are.
And we understand that, but I just want to make sure
Right.
that.
No, I understand
Yeah.
exactly what you're saying, and sometimes that does come up. But if I called everyone case I looked at, I'm not sure that would be beneficial to them, just as far as that goes.
Okay.
I'd like to interject just briefly.
Sure. Absolutely.
And I'm going to speak up because I was accused of being soft earlier.
No,
On the record
that's
to reflect that was not the case.
As opposed to all the rest of
I
it.
love you.
I'll get inquiries. I'll get emails, phone calls from family members asking about loved ones that they've lost, cold cases, and I refer those to Pat, and he runs those to ground. And he establishes contact with them at that point and lets them know what's going on. One of the reasons behind the creation of this position is I had a case with a young man that I prosecuted, and then he was later murdered. And his mother would call me and ask me about her son. Do you remember my son? And then later I became the DA, and I told her I would do what I could. And in conversations with the detectives over at TBD and the homicide unit, they're very busy. We have a number of shootings, and unfortunately a number of homicides that they have to deal with as they come in the door. And, there's just not enough time in the day. So with respect to those families who are still looking for justice and still waiting for that day to happen, I wanted to give them some hope. And I wanted to do that by bringing Pat on board. And I think he's done that because since that time, we've gotten more interaction from families reaching out to us and asking us about those cases.
Well, I want to personally thank you for bringing him along on board. I think that's very important to families. I can't stress that enough. Sometimes we know and we're just not speaking up. Sometimes we're not ready, so to have all different angles out there is great. So I want to thank you for giving him that position.
Thank you.
And taking that position. So how do we contact you with tips, or how do family members contact you? Do you guys have an email, a phone number that you could throw out?
I certainly have a personal email that we can post, but we don't have like a dedicated website. Most of the tips go through Crime Stoppers for a reason, because everybody kind of knows Crime Stoppers, and it's an easy one to get in contact with, and they are more organized, or just, I shouldn't say more, but just very well organized as far as if they want to have us contact them, we can do that. I would really refer tips to go to them. But if it's family members or something like that, they can contact me really through the district attorney's office main number and provide their name and information, and I will call them back. So
just call the DA's office.
I would say if it's like family members, if it's
Okay.
a tip, they can do it that way, or they can do it through Crime Stoppers.
And what's the DA's number to call? 233-8200, extension what?
I'm going to have to look that up.
Look it up.
Councilwoman.
I don't know the name.
They keep changing it. I believe it's 251-4330. but
Oh,
let me
they did,
confirm that.
251.
4330. Let me confirm that for you.
Okay. All righty. There was one more thing.
That is correct.
Thank you. Thank you. We will make sure that people know that. Thank you. Mike? Oh, I'm sorry, Karen?
Related to this exchange, I have a suggestion. I know I'm watching city manager here who has set as a top priority for us for this year for the city, customer service. And when you start a routine, it needs to become consistent and reliable, but a possible solution to what you all have just discussed is to annually, first week of February, something, Valentine's Day, whatever it would be, to send out letters to all the family members that you have of record, or to the families of record, just saying, we continue to keep your loved one in mind. Just know that we keep these files open and look at them. If you've heard anything or have any suggestions for us, please let us know. And then you can refresh with a phone number, encourage them to get hold of Crime Stoppers with tips, but just refresh that. It doesn't have to be a personal phone call, or maybe that would not set the expectations like an outreach would, but it would say, once a year, we're going to hear from them till this is solved or forever, just with a hello and if you've heard anything. Because sometimes these things happen when people get old or get sick and finally start talking, right? Mm-hmm. Whether it's an immediate family member that in fact has kept things close all those years, or someone else, just whether it on the investigation side provokes that, or just on the family side, the comfort that it's once a year. It's just a thought.
Thank you.
Let's hear from the real detective.
Not the
Thank you,
tech
Chair.
detective.
Yeah. I spent some time in homicide. I echo what the chair says about having this position in our community. I think it's extremely important. I'm glad that you saw the need without having to be prompted to put that position in place, because that tells me that you really have a strong interest in serving the public.
Thank you.
I think we should be proud, and I know I am, of the clearance rate. That doesn't mean that the work that other agencies do is insufficient or not up to standard. It's just the way things are. You and I both know that if you have the information, have the evidence, you can act on it. If you don't, there's not much more you can do. I asked about a couple things that you brought up with regards to evidence and how some of it can be destroyed. And I know that's for sure the case. Has the department increased its capabilities in maintaining the evidence in a way that hopefully further loss will be reduced?
Could probably refer that to Chief Wheelis, but the short answer is yes.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. There's a number of ways, and that's what I was struck with when Pat was talking about what he was talking about. As simple as a lot of the reports we have now are not paper. Mm-hmm. They are scanned in. We have electronic copies. Everything we do now, field reporting, is an electronic version. So just something as simple as that means if you have a pipe burst and a box of papers gets ruined, we don't have that occur anymore. That's not how that works. Mm-hmm. That's the big thing. The other thing I was struck when he was talking about some of the other historical cases, BTK that we all know, DNA was a big piece of that. Mm-hmm. DNA is a very common piece of prosecutions and investigations today. It wasn't always such a thing. So I think that's a big piece of it too, which also opens the door for a lot of these older cases. The evidence aspect and the analysis that Pat's talking about is a big piece of what he does, is to go back through those old cases, see what evidence, the physical evidence from the scene is, and see how that relates to the technology we have today. And that's the most exciting thing about the DA making the commitment to this position is none of us, as we sit here today, know where technology is going to be in 10 years or in 20 years. So preservation of evidence, you're absolutely correct, is a key thing. So there's a lot of things we've done. The evidence procedures, even the way we store it from the physical evidence standpoint, it's a lot different, and I won't get too far in the minutia, but the packaging is better, everything is better to keep the preservation of it. The DNA samples that we have on file in various databases here in the state of Kansas, that doesn't go away, CODIS hits. So that kind of forensic evidence capabilities along with the report writing are all the advancements, and like I said, we don't know where technology is going to be, so that's why this position is so important and such a commitment from our DA, as you all have pointed out, because to have somebody whose sole job is to come and review those cases, and we have new technology developing every day, from fiber analysis to some other things that are very exciting. So we continue to upgrade how we collect evidence at the crime scenes that we go to now, but also the way that we preserve it for what we have technology today, but also for tomorrow.
You know, that leads me down the trail that I was also going to bring up, and the collecting of evidence, that puts the spotlight back on your crime scene investigation unit. I don't know that we've really spoken specifically about that unit and how important it is to preserve that physical evidence, because I do think that at the very beginning, things could happen that would make it extremely difficult to continue an investigation successfully if that isn't done. So my compliments to the unit, and that brings back in, I think, the other aspect of training and how the department keeps that unit up to speed and above in collection of that information, because I know it's important to have that available to you, to be able to collaborate with the KBI and its lab and other entities that would process DNA evidence or other evidence. I think that's something still that Pat's kind of modest. I'm sure that he didn't want to speak to it, but all that coordination and collaboration has to come because somebody is doing that. And I think that's probably a large part of Pat's job, is to make sure that all those agencies support his efforts. And that's something I want to make sure the public knows, that it's not just one guy over there doing it. I mean, he's got the background, the expertise, and the relationships with other support agencies that makes it possible to solve some of these cold cases.
I would agree. I mean, we are constantly looking for what cutting edge training and technology and equipment we can get to our CSI guys to upgrade the end performance that they have. We have a great number of, and I'll let the DA speak to this, but we have a great number of collaborations we do with his office from an equipment cost sharing perspective, because we understand the overlap between investigation and prosecution at a successful high level. I would also agree with you that Pat McLaughlin is very humble and modest in regards to, we were very fortunate, the DA's office was very fortunate to hire an expert in his level of investigation, not only with what he knows specifically about these cases they're dealing with, but the way that Pat works with people. He was able to do a transition like we've talked about. He already knew the people at the department. He knew how things ran. He knew the cases. He was able to start with day one transition because of his past experience. Didn't have to waste a lot of time getting up to speed. He was up to speed. So we were very fortunate in all of those areas, but we lose sleep over the cases that we don't solve. So we're always looking for technology or training or equipment for our detectives, our CSI guys, any way that we can make it better, because to this day, I can tell you the 3 cases that I have that are unsolved homicides. So I know Councilwoman Ortiz and I have spoken about it a number of times. The families live and breathe these cases. So do the investigators. I've learned there's a great many of the prosecutors who do as well. So I think that's what this is a great opportunity for us to know, is to reassure the public that this is a top priority, and we're not just talking about it. We're putting the money and the resources and the staffing where they need to be, in our estimation.
I appreciate that, Chief. I really do. And it's not coincidental, but, you know, I think it's appropriate at this time when we're going into budget considerations and people wonder about how the money is being spent with the Topeka Police Department. And I think it's important to keep in mind that that kind of equipment and training is necessary to have an effective police department. And to suggest otherwise, I think, is short-sighted. So I appreciate that you speak to that.
And just as far as even cell phone downloads. I mean, there's so much more information on cell phones now, and it's a requirement, really, for investigations and prosecutions. So that's another area of where technology advances, and we have to keep up.
Pat, you were talking about Crime Stoppers as being probably the main conduit for tips that come to you. And I know this has happened before because I've had that experience, is the Department of Corrections, do they have a pretty good working relationship with you too as well? Because I know that, sometimes you get that jailhouse talk going on and it can be just talk, and sometimes it turns into something.
Well, I would say we definitely have a working relationship with obviously our local Shawnee County Department of Corrections across the street here. But as far as an actual formal program, I'm not aware that one is set up for tips in that manner.
I'd like to weigh in on that.
Okay.
Mike, as you know, most people over there are represented by counsel. And so when they have an interest in sharing information with us on an unsolved investigation, the process we go through is what we call a proffer letter, where my office will contact the defense attorney and say, have your guy come in and talk to us, and if what he has is credible and actionable and leads to, the prosecution of another individual, they'll receive consideration on their end. And we have been successful in doing that. I get letters all the time from the jail.
Yeah.
So I think that's our referral program from Shawnee County Department of Corrections.
Well, I was just curious
That's a
about it.
volunteer referral program.
That's right.
I was curious about it. I know that I've had the opportunity in my past to be able to get some headway on some cases because of that opportunity.
I'm sure.
Has the public been helpful in providing maybe a video surveillance or witness information that has been supportive of your efforts?
Well, I would say obviously a lot of the cases that I look into, video is just not a reality at that point.
Yeah.
It's more of a recent phenomena. And the video, by and large, is collected by the detectives or crime scene around the time of the crime, especially with video overlapping. It only sticks around for so long. So that's more of the initial investigation that, I wouldn't be out picking up video because usually it's gone by then or it's already been done. As far as the witnesses go, really the main thing that I would express is that people know. There's a lot of these crimes that people know, and for one reason or another, and they just aren't coming forward. And we do get a lot of people that do come forward, but a lot of it is somebody told me this versus I saw this. And if I just had one good witness on one of these unsolved that was a first-hand witness, we would probably get prosecution on these cases because a lot of the cases are really good. We just need that extra piece. So that'd be the one thing I would just reach out to those who, have witnessed something or have really good information to step forward and do the right thing.
Well, I appreciate your comments on that because encouraging the community to be more involved in the solving of cases that are important to them.
Well, I think the older cases, quite honestly, I know there is some fear on witnesses on newer cases of retaliation and things like that. These older cases, this quite honestly really unlikely because a lot of the people are not around anymore for one reason or another, not in town. And so those cases, I think people should feel more comfortable coming forward for that reason alone.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you, Chair. That's all I have.
Thank you. I will continue to say this again and again. It's very important. The community needs you, and we need the community. We have to work hand in hand to make our city safer. So is there anything else? Chief, is there anything you'd like to add?
I think you guys just touched on a little part of that. As much credit as I give, and goodness knows I do, for the hard work that our detectives do, that clearance rate is reflective on a community that cares about these crimes, comes forward. There's been a lot of cases this year and every year beforehand that the community has come forward with information and let us solve those in a quick, timely manner in the same year, and that goes for the cold cases too. But so as much credit as I like to give the police department, because I know how hard they work, that doesn't happen in the community unless they care about it, that high clearance rate. So I just wanted to point that out as well.
Thank you. Thank you again for coming. We thank you for your partnership and your continued support. And if there's anything else we can do, let us know.
I will, thank you. Thanks again for having us here today. I do want to echo what Chief just said. Absolutely agree. When the community is invested in the outcome of the investigation, those investigations produce good results, and the offenders are held accountable. And so I think that's fair to say across the board. And then I just want to thank the chief for letting me know about this event here today, for bringing me in, and for our ongoing partnership. The trust that we have between us and the way we work together has lended to opportunities like this, where Pat can sit over in the police department, embedded with the homicide detectives, and get information in real time, and walk over to somebody's desk and say, hey, we need to go call this person, because sometimes that's what's needed. So I appreciate you, Chief. Thank you all.
And I just want to close by saying our Crime Stopper number is not recorded here. It goes, I was told it goes off. You want to explain that? It goes off to New York or somewhere and comes back? So I want people.
Not sure. I believe it is an out of state.
It's out of state,
Yeah.
and then it comes back, but it's not. It's not
Right, we
traced.
don't
It's
know
not
where it we don't
recorded.
know who
And I want
calls it
people
in.
to feel safe with that.
It's completely anonymous.
There you go.
That's right.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Okay, next we have continued discussion on the ABLE training.
Sergeant Ryan Hayden's back with us.
I am back. As he said, my
Recording
name's Ryan
stopped.
Hayden. I spoke to you guys last
Recording
month
in
about
progress.
the ABLE program that is underway at the Topeka Police Department and nationally. It's not just a local program, it's a national program. And you guys have asked me to come back to ask any questions that you like, so what can I help you with?
I think you got through the presentation, and
That's
I
right.
think that there was some questions after he left. Is that correct? Or we wanted to have some discussion. I don't feel like the committee felt like there was enough discussion on that.
Well, Sergeant, I appreciate what you, if I may, Chair.
Yes, you may.
I appreciate your presentation last time.
Yes, sir.
And returning. And my questions are asked to really give even more, I think, substance to the effort that ABLE brings to the Topeka Police Department and this community. I think it really shows an effort to reinforce the high standards that our department has put in place, to promote ethical behavior and professionalism with regards to not just the officers, but the community as well. And I think if you could maybe, I don't know that in your presentation, we got much about the history of ABLE and how it came to pass. Do you have some of that you could share with us?
I could give you how I understand it, just a brief outline.
Okay.
But it was developed by a man named Irvin Staub, who is he's a Holocaust survivor. So that got him interested in, when they started catching some of these Nazis and started to prosecute some of them, a lot of their reasoning right behind their actions was, I was just doing what I was told. And he kind of fell into that as a researcher and was trying to figure out, well, is that possible? Is that true? Can somebody actually be just following orders that somebody else gives them to kill somebody else? And unfortunately, right, he did kind of find that was potentially true because of lots of different kind of social mechanisms that are in place. So he was a researcher that dove into that, which led into his work in the kind of sociology field. And then he developed a program that he initially kind of pitched to, as I understand it, the LAPD after the Rodney King incident. Didn't gain a whole lot of traction there. But then after Katrina, New Orleans Police Department had a bunch of issues. And he started a program there called EPIC, Ethical Policing is Courageous. And then that morphed into what is now the ABLE program when it kind of after the George Floyd incident, there's kind of more of a national call for, hey, we need some programs maybe to address some things. And that kind of led into the ABLE program. And then that program is through Irvin Staub and then through his relationship with Georgetown University. And then that has created the program that has gone nationwide.
And this question is either for you or for the chief. And I guess at the core of ABLE, is it to, again, set the standard, keep that standard high, and insist on the practice of those standards and how you provide police service to the community?
It is. That's definitely one kind of facet of it, right? The big thing behind most of the training is internally we are trying to reduce mistakes, prevent misconduct, and then promote health and wellness among officers. And then hopefully by doing all of that, that bleeds into everything that we do, which then bleeds into our relationship with the community. So while we are trying to prevent harm to the community, we're trying to do that internally by just kind of policing ourselves, which is something that we've been doing for years. But a lot of this, the research that he presents and some of the techniques that they present through the program is, hey, why don't I always do this? Why sometimes do I feel some inhibitions? What might be present in a particular department that is holding some people back? And then what are some techniques that I could use to overcome that? What are some things that I can say to another police officer? Part of the big thrust of this is, well, to get through to a police officer, probably it's going to be best coming from another police officer, because we kind of get bullheaded sometimes. A lot of type A personalities in policing. So that is the big thrust of it, is just some techniques for how to overcome some of these things, make it easier for us to talk to each other, and then, potentially internally make it easier for me to accept any kind of intervention that might come my way. Oh, hey, maybe they're right. Maybe I need to change my mind on this.
Well, not to oversimplify it, Chief, I think you and I both know that if top command puts out an edict that this will occur, or this will be practiced in our agency, it'll go so far. But to get it really embedded in the agency or the organization, it has to go deeper with the help of the line command officers and the mid-level officers. Can either of you speak to your observation of how this philosophy has been accepted down the line, and just maybe some personal observations or things that you might be willing to share?
I think there's a lot of things that go into, at least when you look at it from the upper level management, about how you roll out a program like this, if you're actually going to do cultural change and how you're going to move that needle. And it starts with things like deciding who your instructors are going to be. In this case, it was two of the younger new officers that were the rollout program, that were respected from the younger level, because like you said, sometimes when you roll things out from the top, there's a little bit of a disconnect from the troop level. Sergeant Hayden is a relatively new sergeant, but a very respected detective. He's been on the response team, very well respected within the halls of the agency, not from the management level. So the instructors that you roll out with these programs to get the buy-in is probably one of the most important decisions after you vet the validity of the program. That's obviously the biggest thing. But I would speak to you specifically about how much time Chief Cochran and I both spent on discussing how these instructors were going to be chosen and roll out, and then meeting with the instructors and talking to them about the program and making sure that they were embedded in it, and then watching it grow from there. As much as management believes in this, and we absolutely do from top down, having that kind of buy-in from your instructor level that are with the lower level rank and file every day and see what they're going through makes it very well how this program was retrofitted for the police department, how it was rolled out in the instruction phase. So I'm very happy and proud with that, but those things weren't accidents. They were very well thought out. So that's one thing that I can tell you. As these classes have progressed, we have seen discussions where the examples that were given in the training then became examples here at the police department that were then where officers came in similar situations, and I think Ryan can probably speak to this a little bit more because he's been in a lot of the training sessions and I've only been in the ones that I have, but I've heard how we've evolved from examples that were provided by the training to, okay, these are now examples that have happened within the police department that are discussion. So those are all positive signs. Now, having said that, we are very much in the infancy stage and have a long way to go. But those are two things, as you were speaking, that kind of jumped out in my mind. But I would tell you that what we've seen and why it happened that way wasn't an accident.
Thank you, Chief. I really appreciate that. Detective Sergeant, did you have something that you wanted to add? Because he referenced that you too have some observations.
Sure, and I would add to that, I think the microphone is important, and I think that they have done a good job of choosing the instructors that they have, and we've built on some of our team already some more, and I think it is important that the people receiving the training hear it from somebody that they think is invested in it and not just trying to do it for any kind of ulterior motives. But also, in all the trainings that I've been in, it was not an easy step to step into this role, just because you are committing to step up in front of a bunch of police officers and talk about their emotions and their feelings and some of the things that they do that may or may not be right. Maybe just the stuff that we can improve even, and sometimes that's hard. And then asking them to talk to each other about that could be even harder. So when I went to the training after the first two officers became involved, and when I first went, I was a little bit skeptical. Oh, okay, what do we got here? But after seeing that, when they put out a call for some more instructors, it's like, well, I think I want to be a part of that too. I knew those two instructors personally just from my time with them in the department, and that became important to me, and I wanted to be a part of that. So as we rolled it out, time and time again, I heard from the officers in the training programs, hey, we're doing this already. And I think that they are right. This training, puts forth some things that we are already doing in the important, but are doing in this department and as individuals, but it also kind of enhances some of our skills as to, and maybe there's some things that I'm missing just because of the way my brain works and the way my body works and the way these interactions work. And then maybe there are some better ways that I could do these things, interacting with each other, and then hopefully that bleeds over into my interactions with the public. But time and time again, I've heard that, hey, we're doing this already, and I can't disagree with that. And I've also been very surprised with, some of the, oldest officers at the department. Some of the people that you think, you're not going to make a lot of headway with this guy, but hopefully he'll sit through the training and maybe gain something or other. Some of those guys are the most invested in the training and the role playing that we talked about last time, asking us to put ourselves in these situations and talk about it, and sometimes up in front of the class. That's not an easy thing to do, but everybody's been nobody wants to stand up in front of the class initially, but once you kind of wear some of that shock off, they usually become pretty good classes. So.
Thank you. Well, I ask this because I think it's important to bring out the depth of the effort that the department is doing with regards to training and preparing their officers for the street. Because that's the thing I think all of the committee members can agree to. You hear that often from the public that they need more training. Why aren't they trained in this? And that's what this effort has been, is to try and let the public know how much training does actually take place. And just seeing it on a piece of paper doesn't give, I think, any real understanding of what you're trying to accomplish with this training. So that's why I ask these questions, Chief. It's not to try and be critical at all. It's just trying to see how much effort is being done to prepare the officers and to promote professional, ethical behavior in every way they can, and to reinforce it in every aspect of the work. And that's why I'm asking these questions, because when I talked to then Chief Cochran, when he brought me Epic and Able, I was really excited about it. And I really like the way it's introduced to law enforcement. I like the way that it gives techniques and skills for officers to reinforce that in the field, in a real life situation and not in a classroom, so that they can do it without feeling that they've, overstepped their position, even though they may not be a ranking officer. There are, you and I both know, recognized leaders in any organization that they're the ones, like you might say, as an older officer who may be set in their ways, but they can pull a lot of sway for some of the other officers, and when they can see that out on the street, that's being reinforced by those rank and file officers, I think that's important for us to continue to do. And any changes, updates, and that the ABLE program puts out, I would encourage you, and I'm sure I don't have to continue that with that effort, because I think this is something that is just as important as any other skill that the officers learn as they serve the public. So thank you both for your presentation.
You're welcome.
Anybody else? Thank you, Chair.
Well, you're welcome. What does this mean, 100+ ABLE certified agencies?
That, and I don't know how recent that statistic is, but they are pushing this out nationwide to any department that will have them, as I understand it. And there are some commitments that departments have to agree to as far as getting into the program, but they are trying to push it nationally to get as much traction as they can. And I know that this all kind of started during 2020, the year of COVID too. And I've spoken with some of just the ABLE facilitators and the program developers, and they were a little bit disheartened at first because they had to push this all out basically via Zoom. And I was a little bit skeptical about that as well, because I have spent a week on Zoom learning this program, but they put on a very good program, even when you're sitting in your basement. But it was a very good program, and I learned a lot, and it's very interactive. They break you out into small groups, and they facilitate things through that, and that they make you teach it back to them so that they know that you're going to be a good representative for their program. But I think, and just in speaking with them, that they are actually pretty happy with the way things have happened, because now they can push it out to many, many, many more departments than they could potentially initially if they had done this the classic way of, hey, you need to come to Georgetown, we'll teach it to you, and then you push it out and teach it to your agency. But that costs a lot of money. Even though that they put out the program for free, they would have to send me there and pay for my lodging for a week in Georgetown and all this. Right. So this is all, very cost efficient. So I don't know what the number is now. I know that the first guys that went before me were in class 5, and I was in class 15, and that was 6 months ago for me, and they were teaching about a course a week. I know that the state of New Jersey made some sort of commitment where they were going to certify every agency in the state. So that sounds like a lot of logistical work, but.
And then I seen that if we use it, we have to commit to, is that correct? Here, I forgot my glasses. It says, no cost to local law enforcement agencies, but the agency must commit to creation and sustainment of culture of active bystandership and peer intervention through the policy.
Yes, ma'am.
Training, support, and accountability.
Yes.
So if we have to agree to that.
There's, and the chief could probably speak more to that than me, but there were some guidelines that they had to agree to even get us on the roster to participate in ABLE.
And I think Bryan's touching on this, but just to add further, this is an example of the Topeka Police Department being one of the flagship agencies for this new type of training in the state of Kansas, if not the Midwest. And we didn't wait for it to become the standard for everybody else. We put the effort into vetting the program. We saw it was something that we liked. We wanted to implement it. We put the right people in charge, and we've rolled it out. And we're already seeing some positive results. Now, I can tell you there'll be a lot more as we move forward, but I credit this to some of those challenges of supporting it with your training and your policy might be a bigger challenge to other agencies. But we are a CALIA certified agency. We do a great deal of work in regards to policy review. So that wasn't a challenge to us because a lot of our peer support team and other things that we have was already in line with this policy. So that was one of the easier levels of commitment. For us, the bigger part was making sure that we vetted the program, that we were on board with the program. The commitment that they were asking for was something that we definitely felt we could meet. And we wanted to be one of the leading agencies in the state to get this program started, and I don't think that's a decision that we've regretted at all.
And then also, I'm reading 4.2.13B, use of force, duty to intervene.
That's correct.
4.9E, rules of conduct, intervention. So they're holding you to this standard.
Well, we already had a lot
Or
of those policy pieces. That was the easier part for us too. Like I said, a lot of agencies might have found that to be a more daunting task, but we had intervention requirements in a number of our policies already. Use of force, supervisory responsibilities,
I see that.
individual rule of conduct. So for us, this was just a natural progression for that, and the policy piece was something that we already had in place and we're already doing.
Failure to report, rules of conduct for department supervisors. It's awesome. I don't have any more. Karen, you have anything?
I do. Because overall, I think this is perhaps the most important thing we've talked about, or that it's so fundamental to how a department operates and thinks. I think back to some of the earlier conversations we've had where some of the subject matter has been, okay, training's fine, check the boxes, but what are the results? And so I want to ask about that. But further, you've talked about how important it is to select the trainer and a training process, which we've not touched on before, and it is tremendously important. And I'm really impressed to hear that, because if the training content, process, and who's delivering it, where it's embedded in the department, what I'm hearing throughout is give me whatever feedback you can, is that this model is a change in culture for a police department, in that if we're paramilitary and it's traditionally been top down, and when somebody gives orders, you follow them. You don't question them. You follow, you do what you get told. You follow our rules, or maybe the rules that are kind of the not official rules in the department, but we know who we are, we're family, and this is how we roll. Yet with ABLE, the issue is, no, we're a team in a different way. We have mutual responsibility to do the right thing. And so instead of having to stand silent if somebody's doing the wrong thing, it's flip that to saying the way you can be the best possible team member, if I'm hearing this, is to speak up. But that is counter to how we're raised. And even professionally, how people in all sorts of professions get trained, right? Oh no, praise in public, criticize in private. You don't have time to do that when you're out there in front of however many people dealing with the situation and having to make decisions right there and now on camera as well. So how is it really going over then? And in terms of results, without doing anything inappropriate, some examples that you can share of how this is playing out in the department today?
Well, I would say the first thing that we have to acknowledge is that community expectations change, generational expectations change.
Sure.
And I think that this has been a great opportunity. Some of these policy pieces for intervention have been in place for a number of years. I think what we do now, and certainly I can tell you the last 5-6 years when I've been in the upper command level, we always spent a great deal of time in thinking about how to roll out new programs. What we didn't do was share a lot of that information with the public. I mean, this committee is a great opportunity for that, because we don't generally have the opportunities as the chief of police to talk about, hey, when we decided to roll this program out, we really checked and made sure we had the right instructors, and we met with them to buy in. We don't have those times where we usually discuss all that. So I wouldn't want to say that didn't occur, because that did occur. I think this is just giving us the opportunity to do that. I do think that there's a lot of expectations that have changed generationally, and I think you're right, the rank structure in regards to that. But I can tell you that we can say, and obviously in generalities, we have seen in review of different situations for a variety of different reasons, we have seen people intervene when somebody's language was getting heated to try a different tactic on a de-escalation type thing. We see that with some regularity. Internally, we've seen even something as simple as a roll call discussion that got heated for points of view, and then them saying, hey, let's talk about this later, or somebody coming in who was outside, not involved in that discussion, and taking it to a different angle to let the party, hey, I hear what both of you are saying, but maybe we need to look at this and give this some time. So I can tell you those kind of examples we're already seeing, but I agree with you that there is an expectation change to some regards, but there has always been a duty and a responsibility to intervene and do what's right according to the law and according to the policy, which is the realms that we live in for a number of years. So it's a cultural change. It's very much an opportunity for us to bring this out and talk about some of the inner workings of the agency to the public, which is, I think, the bigger piece. But to be fair, a lot of these intervention pieces have been in the policy for a number of years, and there's a lot of examples in which they have occurred exactly the way they're written. So it's that combination, but it's just a great conversation for us to be able to have with the community.
Well, I think some of the conversations and even the letter writing and things like that were happening when we embarked on this a year ago, this process, I think it's been a year, hasn't it? Just about. But, you know, the issues of just that many people came from the military and that military type structure and training, which was just sort of a fundamental. But this is a shift on how a team is, what being a good soldier is, if you will.
Well, I think that's right, but the only thing I would caution you on is there's always been a rule since, or at least the 28 years that I've been here. I can't speak to it beyond that. I mean, you still have a moral, legal, and ethical obligation to do what's right. And according to the law, there's not an order. You do not. Our policy has stated for those 30 years, you do not have to follow an order that is illegal or unethical or immoral. That's always been a choice. I think this gives a lot more dialogue and a lot more framework and a lot more support for a newer, lower ranking officer to make that courageous decision. But I think those things have occurred in the vacuum, but I'm excited about the opportunity that this is a lot more formalized, it's a lot more framework. And I think what Deputy Mayor Padilla was talking about earlier is a big point. How do you take the training from the classroom? And it's what you talked about, and accountability. And how do you know that that's working? Well, part of it is you get a new program that speaks to the current generation in terms that they do and supports them individually to make those decisions. Because even things like scenario-based training that we're in doing the scenarios, it's not the lecture class where somebody's talking to you for an hour, because we know that's not the most effective way to enact change. So you have smart people who use smart training to reach the people and actually impact the changes. And then as management, we support them by policy and training. And when those things occur across the board from the upper level management, we reinforce those that this is the way that these things should be done. You did the right thing and we support you. And that's what we have to do. So I can tell you some very minor examples like that we see that get reported to me all the time. And that's only because the decision that we made at the beginning to have the right trainers involved. But this training is geared towards the next generation of law enforcement officers. And so it speaks to them in terms they are. Ryan has talked a lot about it, and he could talk even more. But this training, the scenario-based thing, is built to engage you and get you thinking. It's not just writing down, these are the steps that you may or may not remember. It's getting you thinking so that when you leave that training, you're still thinking about, okay, that situation and that situation. Because when you get into a situation on the street, your brain works, and we know this cognitively, your experience level. Okay, now I have that frame of reference in class that may never have happened to me in real life, but I know in class we did the scenario training. And, so to me, that's a very important piece of this training that spoke to me, that scenario training, because that's what triggers your mind where you have a frame of reference for your experience to revert back to. So I have seen some examples. We will continue to see more, and we will continue to ensure, as long as I'm where I'm at anyway, that those things are reinforced positively when people make the right decisions for the right reasons.
Could you give a couple of those?
Like I said, I just did a couple. I mean, a couple of roll call conversations that were heated discussions about legal issues or, search and seizures or whatever, differing perspectives on that, which is totally normal. They get to a level of, okay, well, maybe we're not being very productive anymore, and maybe things are starting to get a little personal or heated. And then you have somebody else who intervenes and says, hey, I hear what both of you are saying, but maybe you need to think about it from here. Or maybe it's as simple as the sergeant coming in and going, I think we've talked about that enough today. And then going out and meeting with them on the streets and those kind of things are just some things that have come in mind. But we have had situations where officers were on calls, they didn't click, the message they were trying to relate to the citizen wasn't being received that well, and so they switched people out, tried a different tactic, and nobody got bent about that one way or the other.
And see, that's where you've got the rules, but you've changed the culture, and that's what I'm hearing.
Yeah.
And
we're still working, but yeah, I'm very happy with where we're at this stage of it. But it's going to be good. I really believe that.
Thank you.
It's one of those things that's hard to have a metric on, because if it works the way it's supposed to, it's not getting to the point where anybody really even hears about it that much. It becomes so commonplace that we're all doing it, and it just becomes part of the daily life.
We all know what the chatter can be of
Certainly.
So, they get away with this, get away with that, and so on. And it is hard to measure when that diminishes.
Right.
But then you can step back and go, yeah.
That's why it's so important to have the instructors plugged in with where they are, because they get a lot of the stories back to them, and then they'll share some of those stories. But and a lot of times we'll hear stories about other things, and nobody's even thinking about it being the ABLE program. But I see the needle that's being moved on how people are intervening, how people are interacting with each other, not just in citizens, but also coworkers.
Well, and I think if the citizens, this is intended to be something that is then embedded without even having to think about it in the department, but is also shared with citizens. Is that
I agree.
correct?
Yeah.
So we have those steps yet to maybe do some more on?
Yeah, ultimately, everything that we do translates into how our service is done with the citizens and how that's perceived. So that's the ultimate proof in the pudding, and I think we'll see some examples of that. I'd love to be able to bring some of those back at some point.
Well, where the bystanders are supposed to speak up, and obviously in George Floyd, for instance, they did. It just didn't do any good.
Well, and this program is, I would say the main thrust of this is internal. It's not something that we push out onto the public. This is improving our performance so our interactions with the public become better, and then situations like that don't happen.
Sure. I guess I was happy to have my page open to the other successful bystandership programs and was thinking about the fact that it was supposed to react also to citizens, and that correspondingly then it included an encouragement to citizens to speak up.
Well, and certainly part of that is part of the whole training is I need to be responsive to when I hear somebody telling me something.
Yeah.
So then if they do say something to me, then I should be more receptive to that, potentially, if it's relevant. You're correct about that.
Well, maybe we bystanders are more inclined to speak up.
Sure, I think we're open to those kind of feedback, and like you said, it's more about how we perceive that and then what we do accordingly. So I think it's a piece of it, sure.
Well, it's exciting, so thank you, and thanks for the extra time.
Absolutely,
processing.
absolutely.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
If I could just speak to one thing.
Yes.
Councilwoman Hiller mentioned about a shift or a cultural change, maybe for policing in general, or did you mean specifically
Well,
to the
there
police
was,
department?
nationally conversations about policing in general, so I made reference to that.
Yeah, okay. I just want to speak to what I believe in, and I know from my time with the police department, is that there have always been people within the police department that had the courage to intervene when there was bad behavior. So that isn't a huge cultural change. There's always been good officers there who were willing to step up and take the heat for it, and get maybe criticized by some of their fellows to make sure that bad things didn't happen or continue to occur. So with that regard, I think the department's always had that base to be proud of. What I like is that this encourages more people who might want to say something you used the example of George Floyd. That's the thing, I mean, the whole scenario was horrible. But I can't imagine that in the Topeka Police Department, that you would have had at least, like, there were, what, 3 other officers there? 2 of them standing by and not doing anything. I can't imagine that happening here in this department, because I know had I been there, I'd have walked over and knocked one of those police officers on their side, or got Chauvin off Floyd just by pushing him off or dragging him off. I don't think that's going to happen here, because there have always been people who are willing to intervene, but they have to feel that they're going to get the support to intervene. And I think that's what this ABLE program does, is you know you want to intervene, do it. Don't think about it, just do it. And I think that's the standard that brings to the forefront what this ABLE program does, because I think it just reinforces the good intentions of the officers who are in the department already, who would not stand by to see unethical behavior occur in the city. So that's just my observation, because I know from my experience, I've never seen anybody abused like that, like the George Floyd incident, because there was always somebody there to stop it, the rank and file. So thank you, Chief.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Good discussion, very good discussion. I want to call on Captain Colleen Stewart. Do you have anything that you would like to add? I know you've been sitting there so pretty and smiling. I just want to make sure.
Chief's pretty too.
She is.
The only thing I would say is to echo what the discussion has been in regards to ABLE. This is about creating an environment that breaks down the stigma of being that person who stands up, and to say that you need to, you have to, and when you do, you will be supported in every way. So it's just to encourage doing the right thing, standing up and doing the right thing. And I believe that's what ABLE brings to the table. I would also say one other facet of that is not only creating that environment for our line, but our commanders attending that training and being a part of that training and starting to build the relationships that we've really not seen in the past. It's been up and down, line versus management type of thing. But for us as commanders to participate fully and investing ourselves in that training, role playing and all, I think also speaks volumes to the investment that we have in the program.
Thank you.
Yeah. Awesome, through the lens. Through the lens. Okay, thank you for coming back.
You're welcome.
I don't know if they'll call you again, but
I'll be around.
We'll appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Next, we want to talk about the peer support team and city employees assistant program.
I'll cover one of those.
Jackie Russell's going to take the second one.
Jackie's going to take the second part, okay. And can you?
Does anybody mind if I take her off leash? Would that be a problem?
No, I don't. Not unless she's going to smell my feet again.
Well, I can't.
Crashed around the thing.
She'll probably roam around and then fall asleep here.
I want to see how much hold you got onto her now. Last time you were in the parking lot fighting with her.
See if you can do your presentation and keep one eye on her.
Right. Yeah, we'll see. For anybody that doesn't know, my name is Matt Danielson. I'm a lieutenant, and I'm currently assigned to our third shift Field Operations Bureau. And so in January of last year, I was assigned to be the commander in charge of our peer support program. We're to take that over. Captain Stewart was one of the former commanders in charge of that program. So we've had a program since 2013. So we've been kind of cutting edge departmentally as far as having a program like this in place. A lot of places have peer support programs now, but back in 2013, that wasn't the case. So really my biggest thing was, how do I take a program like this that's already good and try to make it a little bit better? So that's kind of been my task, my challenge, if you will. So the peer support program really, it's not working. Oh, there we go. Okay. It's really pretty self-explanatory, and I'm glad I got to follow Sergeant Hayden in his presentation, because he kind of highlighted a lot of the reasons why a peer support program is important. And it can be summarized really by saying that the repeated exposure to trauma causes a lot of problems in police officers, and we're exposed to a lot more trauma than an average civilian would be. So I don't really need to go into why we have a peer support program, but I'll just talk about the team a little bit. We do have a number of supervisors, as you can see here: Sergeant Wren, Sergeant Marr, Sergeant Connell, Sergeant Eubanks, and Sergeant Rose. And then some of our officers here, we got Officer Lawler, Officer Wren, Officer Rowley. We do have a records employee, and I'll get into kind of the reasons behind that here in a minute. But Jeff Coburn, Officer Munoz, Officer Sinsel, and then I had to add some slides. Oops, wait a minute. Is this not the most recent one? It's okay. Well, there's Gracie the Golden Doodle, and she's roaming around right now. So she's our up-and-coming therapy dog. She's currently undergoing some training with me, and she's kind of assigned to me, if you will. I take her home and I bring her to work with me, and she's really just there for daily interactions with employees, both on the civilian and the sworn side. So she's already doing what we want her to do, which is just kind of brighten people's day and make them a little more comfortable and hopefully more productive in the work environment. So she's not a therapy dog yet in the sense that she doesn't have a certification in that, but that's what we're hoping to achieve. We've already attended a couple of classes, and we'll attend at least one or two more before we start seeking a therapy certification. So right now she's just a pup. So, and then so to add to our team, Dr. Prohaska, she works out of an office in Kansas City, and she is kind of our go-to clinical psychologist, and she's an excellent resource. Whenever I need some guidance or some help, I reach out to her. She's also one that's done a lot of our training, so she's going to be doing some more of that here relatively soon. So we'll just kind of go through this. The peer support team exists to help officers and their family members through any personal or professional issues that may come up throughout their careers. And again, that's just the repeated exposure to trauma is kind of why we exist. We work mostly on a volunteer basis, and what I mean by that is a lot of our contacts with people is off the clock, and so people aren't getting compensated for that majority of the time. If we have something major happen, let's say an officer-involved shooting or something, or she had a death of an employee, and we required a big response to the LEC, then of course we would compensate our employees. But outside of that, a lot of the phone calls, a lot of the texts, a lot of the visits to someone's home if they need some support, that's all really just kind of on their own time, and that just goes to show how much the people care that are involved. So we're available 24/7 through phone calls, texts, emails, face-to-face visits, and we put that information out to our employees relatively regularly so that everybody knows how they can get in touch with us. And then I mentioned the training that we got from Dr. Prohaska. It was a 40-hour training. And so we're doing that, and then we're actually looking into doing some more training here very soon. So we spend a ton of hours. I don't get notified on all the contacts because it's a confidentiality piece there, but I do try to log contacts very generally. So the amount of time spent is really countless. So some contacts are handled just individually between the peer support member and the individual who's needing that support. But oftentimes there's things that we can't provide that person individually. So we do then reach out to our employee assistance program, and we refer people to either those resources or Dr. Prohaska, again, is another resource that we can utilize. Hundreds of contacts each year. And again, I mentioned that they're kept confidential. And then we also have been involved in some critical incident stress debriefings, and those typically occur after some kind of a larger scale event. The most recent one I can think of involved an investigation where there was a young child that was killed. And so that obviously had a pretty significant impact on the employees involved, whether it was the dispatchers taking the call, whether it was the CSI personnel doing the photographing and the collection of evidence, the investigators, the initial responding officers. So there was a lot of people that it affected. So we will get those people all in a room and just kind of start a dialogue and get them talking. So that tends to be very helpful. So then moving forward, main areas of concern this past year, as far as categories, were job-related stressors, family concerns, marital issues, and then critical incidents / trauma. And I kind of try to just record a number of different again, general terms as far as what someone is talking about. And so those were just at the top of the list, and job-related stressors was kind of the biggest one. And I think this past year, in terms of the culture and the things that were happening in policing, probably added to that a great deal. So not a very surprising thing. Moving forward, more time and energy is going to be spent on preventative maintenance in regards to officers and their mental health. Kind of to add to that, one idea that we recently had was a peer support library. I'm in the process of trying to collect donations for books. That would be any, you name it, any kind of an issue that might be out there, whether it's addiction or marital issues or financial stress. And I want to have a library of books that we have somewhere in the department. We've got some ideas. That's a developing thing, but I want that to be a resource for people where they can go and anonymously pull a book and keep it as long as they want, and hopefully return it. I'm going to be looking into ways that we can maybe do that digitally as well, knowing that a lot of our current employees, being in a younger generation, don't want to have anything to do with paper. So that's going to be something I'm looking into. I mentioned here that the efforts to increase the team size are underway. That's actually as of a month ago. Here within the last month or so, we actually were able to double our team size. So I apologize, we don't have the current PowerPoint up there, but we added a total of 11 employees to our peer support team. So we went from 11 to 22 essentially, and what that did is it gets us a little bit closer to that 10% mark, which is kind of where we wanted to be, 10% of our sworn personnel, and it's just really an effort to reach more people. And in those 11 people, 2 of them are also civilian employees. So, and that was very intentional. We really wanted to recruit some civilians so that we could touch more of those civilian employees, because we're not all wearing uniforms down there. There's a lot of people behind the scenes in records and other places within our department that they have issues too, and so we want to be there for them as well. So, and then I kind of already mentioned the therapy dog program. We started that. That was an idea that kind of got pushed up and was approved last year. We got that going, and so Gracie, she currently comes to work with me, being assigned to third shift. I go and I take her, most nights, and then we just visit roll call, and she's no good after about 11 or 12, so I take her home. But while she's there, she's pretty effective and really getting a good response from her. So, and then this is the one thing that kind of really separates a peer supporter from just anybody else in the department is this confidentiality piece, and we're really bound to this. Whatever is said between a peer supporter and an officer or an employee, that is kept completely out of anyone else's business. I don't even get told. Matter of fact, if I were to go and ask, hey, did you talk to so-and-so? They're not supposed to even tell me yes or no. And that's how confidential we keep it. And we want to keep it that way. If I ever find out that it's not handled that way, they won't be a peer support member. So to my knowledge, we have not had any issues with that at all whatsoever. Our people take it very seriously. So, and that's really kind of about it. If anybody has questions or anything, I'm happy to.
So what if I'm a peer support person and I find out that my peer, something is detrimental to them, they still can't say anything? I mean, that it's really critical. It's really bad.
It changes things a little bit if we find out, let's say someone is suicidal.
Right, right.
If that becomes the case, then of course there's other people that have to be notified, and we tell them up front, okay, now this is a situation where we've got to take you somewhere, we've got to get you some help. And so, the confidentiality piece has to be broken in certain situations. If there's something criminal in nature going on, if there's something, detrimental to their own.
So there's circumstances.
Yes.
Because I heard you say that it can't be broken.
Right.
Unless there's certain circumstances.
I should have made that clear. I apologize. Yeah, there are certain situations, and they're pretty narrow, but self-harm or criminal activity are a couple of those things that we would go a little further. The circle is still kept very small, though. I will tell you that. It's not, if someone's having suicidal ideation, it's not something that very many people find out about. It's kept very, very tight. So,
what about someone that has maybe done something on the job that shouldn't be out there in the streets? Does that come back to you? If that peer really shouldn't be out there, if you're just seeing that mentally,
it's really not. The answer is it depends.
How is that handled?
It just depends. It depends on the severity of the situation. It depends on if it's something, if it's something that would normally be handled within the normal, corrective action steps that we would have. It's going to be a judgment call on the part of the peer supporter. But if it rises to the level of, like I said, if it rises to the level of criminal activity, that is something that we would want reported and, of course, talked about. So.
Thank you. Any other questions?
I have a thought. You mentioned the library, and if you haven't, I would suggest you contact the public library. They have, even if, as I'm listening, trying to brainstorm what you're trying to do, so you guys don't have to get in the position of being librarians or fundraisers.
Yeah.
And they have the ability to do interlibrary loans. They do the virtual stuff all the time, but if there was a desire for confidentiality, I think they could set up maybe a portal that was just from your department that could therefore allow confidentiality for somebody to check things out as well.
Sure, yep.
I think it'd be real easy to raise money for it, but again, they could probably do that. They've got a foundation that could do that for you, and you'd have probably 20 times the books and resources.
I appreciate the input, and that's something that's kind of I've got in the works a little. So yeah.
Yeah, because I think they'd be happy to do it.
We'll see.
Good for your resources. That's exciting. Thank you.
You bet.
Councilman?
I had a thought. I don't know if this is your area or it would be in Jackie's. People need support for a variety of things. On-the-job stress, mental health, physical health condition, financial problems. We know that in this country there's been, it seems like, an epidemic of addiction to painkillers and those kinds of things. But all those kinds of things be under your umbrella of attention, abuse of alcohol.
Certainly, yeah.
Those kinds of things.
Yeah, any of those things you mentioned are all definitely things that we're human beings. There's nothing that separates us from you guys other than we have a badge on our chest. So, yeah, all of the things you mentioned are things that police officers have to deal with too. And so yeah, we certainly deal with some of those employees that have those issues.
Good.
So,
Well, I'm glad you guys are there to help out.
too.
How does that interface? I'm thinking back to some of our earlier conversations, again, where there was discussion that, officers are human too, and so that individual, whoever, might have just been having a bad day. I would assume that's the trigger.
Yeah.
For how does that work? And with the advent of this program, is that delay a little shorter in terms of getting somebody connected?
Well, I think we're fortunate right now. Captain Stewart is one of the plank developers of the peer support team and has been involved with it for a number of years, and Lieutenant Danielson has done a great job bringing it forward. But I was going to throw her the opportunity because I think it's an important thing that you touched on, that the chair touched on too, is how do we ride that line, the balance between the confidentiality, but making sure in the public safety positions that we have that our employees are in those positions. And I know Captain Stewart has had a lot of experiences with those. And so I was going to throw her the opportunity to talk a little bit about because Matt's right, it does depend on the details and the severity and services that can be offered. And I think it dovetails in to remember the peer support team is only part of all of the employee assistance programs that Jackie will talk about later for the city employees. But I think Captain Stewart is an expert in this area, so I'd like to give her an opportunity to talk a little bit about that, because I think it'll answer some of the questions that you have about how do we do these things in the real world.
Thank you.
And I think it comes back to what we spoke about earlier about being a team. We don't necessarily have to be a peer supporter, we just have to care about each other. And if I'm talking to an employee about a corrective action issue, but I notice that perhaps there's something else involved, I might switch gears and start talking about, how can I help you? Is there anything that you'd like to talk about? Would you like me to get you in touch with a peer support member? We're all about support. We know that we are exposed to secondary trauma daily, so cumulative trauma and stress. And so we have to be that team. We have to be there to support one another. If it's corrective action, we still can ride that line. You know, this is the behavior, this is the violation, this is the clear-cut issue that we need to deal with. But I also understand that maybe there's something on the human side that we can help with simultaneously. And in turn, perhaps softening that corrective action side of it. So we do ride both sides of it. But in the end, it's about showing our employee that we do care about them, that we do understand that they have a lot of other issues that may be bringing into their performance at work, and we have programs and resources in place and available to help them get back on track and to become that successful employee and to reach the potential we know that they have.
And I think it's important for the public to understand that the supervisors have the responsibility on a daily, hourly basis to monitor their people. Matt talked about an incident we had that involved a crime against a child and the debriefs that took place on that. Well, the supervisors monitor their people and the commanders monitor their supervisors after that event for days and weeks, because sometimes it takes a period of time. So there are a lot of people watching. Anytime that we have corrective action, there's always a piece of it that's offered employee assistance. If we have alcohol, substance abuse problems, those kind of things, they're all handled within the employee framework as well as the corrective action. But in our field of public safety, we do not hesitate to take somebody off of the line or out of that role for an administrative leave or just administrative duty if we are working through an issue. And a lot of times those are very successful interventions that result in long-standing careers of successful employees. But the community needs to hear from this. As much as we value peer support and confidentialities, the public safety aspect of this is always on the forefront as well. And there are a number of options, and we work a great deal. Director Russell and I talk a great deal on the phone, and she's a good resource for the entire city in regards to the expertise that she brings in these situations. So I liked what Captain Stewart had to say. There are corrective actions, but it's always about employee support and growth. But we do ask the question of why this occurred, not just stopping at the what. And the peer support team's just in addition to that. So it's all pieces of the puzzle, but I think everybody needs to understand that the intervention as far as removing an employee and it's such a public safety piece as a police officer is always a primary responsibility. And then how do we deal with the employee and support them from that point on?
Okay.
Awesome.
Thank you, Chief.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Lieutenant.
Gotcha.
Without further ado, Jackie Russell.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
I'm not sure if my slides are on this. I submitted them, but I think I was on the agenda a few
Yeah, we've had a couple.
times
I
back.
don't know which draft you have, Liz, but there's like 2 of them.
Yeah. So if not, it's not a big deal.
I sent Taylor the newest one, so if they're on there together, this one?
They
No,
would,
look right now. I found it. I was looking for something.
and I can just speak to it in the interest of everyone's time. That's not a problem. One thing that I'd like to say before I move into the employee assistance program is just the value of the peer support goes much beyond just policing. When we had the critical incident with the tiger attack at our zoo, the first thing that I thought of was peer support because they were right here and I could get them on scene right away. And so they sent a team out to meet with those zoo employees, and that was so valuable. It helped them, even though you would think that there's not a lot of crossover with what they were dealing with. There really was. And we then had peer support folks come back a few weeks later and debrief again. And so it's a very valuable peer-to-peer when you can relate to each other. And I was very thankful that we were able to get them out there to the zoo right away. So we do work collaboratively on a lot of things. Mental health for our employees in general is something that's very near and dear to me. And I think that in order to have people perform at their best in the jobs that we have asked them to do, we need to meet them where they are and make sure that we are taking care of their whole person. And so while we have the traditional employee assistance program that many are familiar with, we also do a lot in the area of mental health over the last several years. I think society has made struggles for people and employees in general more challenging, and we're trying to meet people where they are. So our Our core employee assistance program includes the traditional counseling for marital problems, stress, grief, loss, major life changes, challenges at work, and we use Alternatives Employee Assistance Program, and that is a 24/7 availability. They can have access to a local counselor on site, and we provide up to 6 visits at no cost. Other services that are part of that traditional employee assistance program do include access to and discounts on legal advice, financial coaching and budgeting, and working resources to work through money issues. They are also, if someone's having trouble with childcare issues, they can provide a network to local resources to help with some of those barriers. And they do that over the phone, via in person, and over video. And that's our traditional employee assistance program. Starting July 9th, we are extending this traditional program to include an on-site provider at our on-site clinic twice a month for easy access. One of the things as we monitor issues and work with the clinic, mental health comes up a lot, and Lauren, our provider, shares that she makes referrals, but she doesn't always know if the person follows through. So starting in July, we'll have a provider, her name is Ludi Sapp, with clinic hours here on site, the second and fourth Friday of the month. She is an EAP provider, and she's also in the Blue Cross Blue Shield network. So that will be an option through the EAP for in-person, and then Lauren can make a direct referral. And Lauren has already started booking appointments for her when she gets here because there is such a need. And so in addition to traditional EAP, a couple years ago, we also modified our health plan to make it so that mental health, the first 6 mental health visits are at no cost to the employee. So that maybe they don't want to see an EAP provider, but that opens up the whole Blue Cross Blue Shield network of providers to employees at no cost for those first 6 visits. Employees are also able to leverage that in that if they are seeing an EAP provider that's also a Blue Cross provider, that would give them 12 visits without a copay to try to really make sure they're taking the time and getting the services that they need. We also recognize generationally people want to handle mental health differently, so other options that we have available is, I don't know if you've heard of Talkspace, but it's a texting mental health counselor where you can text with a counselor 24/7. And through the employee assistance program with Talkspace, you sign up and register, and that gives you 6 weeks of 24/7 texting with a mental health professional at no cost to the employee. Through COVID, we also recognized just challenges with availability of providers, and last fall we added First Stop Health, which allows for telephonic health care, but also mental health care 24/7. And they have telephonic counseling available 24/7 where you can get on the phone with a licensed professional as well. So our biggest objective is to remove barriers to taking care of your mental health. And we feel like with substance abuse and in any of those areas, while it may first come to light as part of the performance that you notice on the job, we try to then get the person the resources that they need first, and then we come back and deal with whatever the conduct was at work or the performance issue. So that is a very brief overview. She found my slides, but
Still very impressive that you got all that off the top of your head. So
no, I have the slides with me.
Jackie.
You photobombed her slide.
old variation of the presentation.
So how will this be relayed to our employees, and when will it be relayed to our?
So are you talking about the new on-site provider? That was included in our June benefits newsletter, and then we will continue to do blasts and reminders as well.
Because that sounds good.
Yeah, we're excited about it.
So now I can text somebody about my problems here.
You can text, you can call,
I can go in.
You can go in, you choose. Ludi Sapp also is a local provider that has been, I know she works a lot with the fire employees, and a few years ago we had a symposium to try to help local mental health providers kind of understand public safety and some of the challenges of that work, because sometimes having a provider that understands and isn't shocked by what they see in the course of their work on a day-to-day basis is a challenge. And Ludi is one of the ones that went through that and has certain training for first responders. So we were thrilled that she was able to come on board with this with us.
Awesome. Council members.
Just as a compliment, I think that's a great program that what the city has for its employees. And when we're recruiting for the city, that's one of the things to point out, I think, because people always talk about access to mental health resources, and I think that's a definite benefit for being employed by the city of Topeka. So compliments, Jackie.
Thank you.
Karen? Colleen?
No, ma'am. Thank you.
You got that talk space?
I wrote it down, yes.
Chief?
Well, once again, the deputy mayor, excuse me, I was just going to point out that the city of Topeka is always hiring. We have a number of positions, and it's a great place to work. Lots of benefits, so
We
check
were
into
talking
it.
about talk space.
Well, we all have our time.
I always appreciate the employment plug. We can use all the applicants we can get.
Okay. Brett, you want to add anything else?
Well, I think, I don't have I think the biggest thing with all of these changes that we have with these other types of services is that getting to mental health services is getting harder and harder to get an appointment. They're not taking new patients, that type of thing. These types of services provide us that stopgap measure to make sure that someone gets help, and then they can get into that person to visit. And then also us having our own provider here is going to make a huge difference, because those are set appointments that our employees only are competing for, rather than competing across the general population. And so I think that's going to be a big help. And then also, it's also one of those things you've got to remember is that not every one of our employees is on our health insurance plan. And for that reason, having that available at the clinic now gives them a resource that even if they aren't on our medical plan, they can then access some mental health services. And we find oftentimes, we all know that the world can be difficult on people, and so having those resources available when they need them, because they may not expect an issue to come, and it happens. So I think these changes have been well thought through, and Jackie and HR are really thinking ahead and how that can be assistance to their employees.
So what I heard was this is offered to all City of Topeka employees.
The Employee Assistance Program is available to all employees regardless of whether or not they are on the health plan. And so that's why we ran the on-site provider through the Employee Assistance Program, because we didn't want there to be a mental health barrier for anyone.
I think that's huge, but I sure hope we get that word out so they know that. And then will they be able to bring their families and children? Is it 6 appointments like just
Yes.
for myself, or is it 6 appointments maybe for one of my family members?
It's available to the family members in the household, just like the traditional Employee Assistance Program.
That's awesome.
Yes. And that's 6 visits per issue, so to speak. So an employee could have their
per
own.
issue.
Yeah. So an employee could have their own issue, but there could be a family issue for family counseling, and so the family could have 6 as well as the employee to work through their issue.
Well, Jackie brought that up with all my issues. Per issue, okay, that's awesome. Gretchen, what do you got to say back there? Anything?
Nothing.
All right, let's go home, Liz. Anything else?
Nothing.
This meeting's adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Kevin.
Good to see you.